Well, I know we come from the same place in terms of the product we love, because I heard you when you're on the Reffing It Up podcast with Brian and Jimmy. I know you were talking about your love of like mid-90s WWF, which was my sweet spot, and we'll get to that in a minute. But one thing I think is, there's a lot of a kind of hangover from the Attitude Era still 25 years on, in terms of that was the time when suddenly what it was to be a face and what it was to be a heel suddenly became very, very blurry. And I still think 25 years on, we're struggling with this kind of who is a true heel and who is a true face. And yeah, I think, when you can properly go in there and work a crowd and really get them to hate you, that's where the magic is. And I don't think you see enough of that in wrestling anymore. You see so much kind of, Canadian destroyers on a ring apron, all that kind of crazy spot fest, but enough of like that pure visceral hatred,
That's the thing, is that, today it's become like who can do the most cool moves. So you've got heels going out there doing all these wild, impressive shit for, things for the pop. And then it's like, let's take Swerve Strickland, for instance. Like, he was a heel in AEW, but then everybody started cheering him, just like John Cena. When he was a babyface, everybody started booing him. And when The Rock was the heel, they were booing him, and then they started cheering. So it's hard, because it's like, when you're a heel and you start doing stuff that like really gets you over, then people start cheering you and loving you, and then you're not getting that same reaction anymore. And then like sometimes when you're a babyface and you've been doing the same thing for so long, people get bored with it and they just start booing you. And then it kind of like, so the fans can be kind of the reason why sometimes you get switched from like one thing to the other, than what you're trying to do. But I think back in the day, the heels were definitely more like ground and pound, like no nonsense. And it was just the baby faces who were the ones doing all the big high flying, this and that. And I think the heels are doing that more now. And so I don't know. I think it just kind of like messes with like the whole way that a match is supposed to go, because then you've just got everybody cheering for everybody and nobody's really emotionally invested one way or the other. And then sometimes that'll just make them quiet.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to build stories around that too, right? So, wrestling is all about stories. And that's the whole thing. And me and her were talking, and like I told her once, I said, wrestling is the actual in-ring wrestling is just a vehicle to further the stories. So you got to be a good performer in the ring and all that. But the actual like in-ring stuff is it's literally just there to further the story along, right? So people want to see the stories. And if the crowd is basically just kind of like split, just watching like two guys do stuff, there's just, I don't know how you build a story around it, because it's just guys just doing matches, or cold matches, or, however you want to refer to it. So the stories are very, very important, and having that clear distinction of this guy is a bad person and this guy is the guy trying to do the right thing. However you want to build that story is as old as time.
Yeah, and the difference between the product now versus the product that, the three of us grew up watching was, mid-90s WWF, you'd have a bunch of promos, bunch of pre-records, you'd have loads of squash matches with the heel just decimating enhancement talent, and you'd build for months and months and months, sometimes even a year, for that big payoff match. And now it's like feud begins on Friday, Monday the match is happening, and then it's
that's the worst.
It's that pace, isn't it? Yeah, it's the lack of. Yeah. I think that's why everyone gravitated towards WrestleMania over the last couple of years, is because of the payoff of a long-term storytelling. Whereas if that whole Cody storyline had happened 10 years ago, he'd have been champion in 2 months. Like, it's this, finally we're almost starting to go back to basics in terms of why we became fans in the first place when we were young, but we don't.
Well, that's, WWE is really good at that. Like, a lot of places won't even really, they'll be like, oh, our story goes from Friday to Monday. You know what I mean? And it's like, man, like, you could get like 6 months out of this. Like, WWE can do a storyline for 1 to 2 years.
Yeah.
And draw it out. That's wrestling.